Life, wisdom.
I'm Psyche Truth correspondent Karina Rachel, and today on the Truth Talks, we're discussing genetically modified foods. So my question for you, are GMOs safe to consume? Please be sure to leave a comment letting me know if GMOs are safe or GMOs are unsafe. I'm joined today by Dr. Vincent Belanzi. He is a functional medicine practitioner, chiropractor, and clinical nutritionist based out of Austin, Texas. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure always.
So, genetically modified foods, GMOs, this is a hot topic because these foods are present in most of the processed foods and just many of the foods that we're consuming. There's a lot of controversy over whether GMOs are safe or whether they are unsafe. Can you let us know what's your perspective?
The best answer is we don't know. And so that calls into question, should we consume them or not? It looks promising because we can make crops pest resistant. We can increase yield. You've probably seen the monster salmon. You grow this big fish that's never been seen before. And yeah, it's more protein, but it's an altered protein. Now, the body regulates itself by altering molecules of protein. It folds it differently. It does something to it. So you can actually get the body to react differently with even a natural protein. The question is, if we genetically modify that protein, if we change its structure, what kind of effects are we going to get? And there are some studies showing that those proteins don't operate so well in us. And then the genetically modified organisms that are produced, if they're going to genetically modify a bacteria or something, and it does something and they make it do something more potent. For example, Monsanto genetically modified an organism in their Roundup Ready crops. And by modifying it, it made it more virulent. It actually was more dangerous to insects. It hurt their digestive tract. Right. We know that it killed the pests. But we've also found now that it's hurting people, that we have the increased permeability, what's called leaky gut. We see digestive damage done by people eating those crops through the bacteria. And there's other reasons that we suspect the genetically modified crops. Basically, the body it does pretty well with what it's evolved with. There are foods that we've always had around. There are nutrients, there are molecules. Our body knows what to do with them, and there's no real problem. When the body's presented with something new, okay, is that a foreign body that should be attacked? Is that something I can use here, or what do I do with it? Even something simple like the processing of foods, if we take a fat and make it into a trans fat, transform it, then it begins to affect how the membrane of a cell works. It begins to affect other structures in the body, and suddenly I have disease. So the question should be answered, I believe, before we start consuming it without any thought at all.
Right. So certainly, and in there's many countries where, at the very least, there's laws regulating that GMO products are labeled.
At least you're informed, yes.
And in the United States, we actually don't have any such legislation. So you will never see on a food label, contains genetically modified organisms. It's
actually worse because we've gone as far as to protect those people that do the modification. So not only are we going to make it so nobody has to be informed, that you really won't know what you're buying, which is something that we used to stand for, but we've also made it so we're going to hold harmless anybody that does damage. You've heard that Monsanto now has immunity. They can do pretty much whatever they want, and if they cause a problem, you can't go back to them. It's the same with the manufacturers of vaccines. In the name of terrorism or something, we've decided that we can't hold them accountable if they cause somebody to have a problem. And it's just wrong. Not that I want to support lawyers and litigation, but now you have no recourse if there is harm done.
Right. And would you say that because there are certain countries where GMO labeling is required or GMO products are completely illegal, I mean, wouldn't that serve as an indication or at least a warning to us that hey, maybe these aren't safe?
I would think so. And the European Union, other countries have actually done studies, and there are a few that are controversial, the mouse study in France and all that, but there are a number of studies showing that the GMOs are causing some problems, sometimes very serious problems. So it's enough for them to question it and not put it out to the public. So I really think we should be a little more conservative as well, yet we've got a system that's based on who's making money.
Right.
So
from your perspective, the use of genetic modification, its main purpose is just to increase profits, to
Yes.
increase yields, to increase profits for those companies.
The idea is it would be better. We could make better products for people. We could feed more people. I mean, there are. It's not all just profit motive, but of course they're going to make more money with the genetic modification, and it's a matter of what is more profitable for them. Truly, you could argue that there might be some benefits. I mean, everything's not absolute, but I'm still very cautious about whether I want myself to even consume anything genetically modified. So I avoid things that I know that I can't find that are not modified.
Right.
And there's some things you almost have no choice in these days.
Mm-hmm. And we actually did a video that discusses how to identify foods that contain GMOs
By
and
labeling,
kind of
right.
discussing what the top, genetically modified crops are. Let's go back to the Roundup Ready corn, which is maybe the GMO with has gotten the most attention. So essentially they have genetically modified the corn plants so that they can tolerate all of this pesticide that's being put on them. So you were discussing a little bit about, well, how, if these plants are now incredibly, toxic to all of these insects and they're being sprayed with all of these incredibly toxic pesticides.
Exactly.
It just doesn't seem like this could be something healthy.
It seems like we should make the logical connection that's going to hurt us. It's the same as somebody overusing pesticides and just ignoring the fact that they can also harm us. If something's lethal to an insect, it's likely also lethal to us.
Right.
And we can talk about dose and toxicology, and a little bit of something won't hurt you. And that's one of the problems. People tend to single one thing out at a time. The real danger is the accumulation of things. So if I get a little bit of pesticide here, a little bit of Roundup Ready here, and it's probably not a problem one at a time, but at some point I will reach a threshold where I'm going to at least get sick, if not die, because of that.
And these, toxins like we find in pesticides, these are things that will, accumulate in our body, right?
Absolutely. They've tracked certain medications 20 years later after use, especially things like anesthetics. And some of these pesticides and other things seem to hold on and stay in the body quite a while, especially if they can get deposited in the fat stores. You may hold on to them for years, and then you lose weight and suddenly get a dose. That's been seen many times. Right.
So just to kind of recap what we've discussed here, at this point, there's really this is such a new thing, genetic modification, that there's really no long-term evidence that can even be seen yet.
There's not. We don't have enough experience with it yet. They're developing things and putting them right out on the market, and nobody's really being very cautious.
Right.
And I think we're more cautious with pharmaceutical drugs than we're being with the modification of our foods. Even other things that are done, not just genetic modification, but a lot of the additives we put in them. There are some foods that people consume almost daily that have a fair amount of pesticides in them.
Right.
So for shelf life, but what's it doing to us?
And you can only imagine, if you're eating a food that contains a lot of, preservatives so that it can last a really long time. Well, what is that going to do once we eat it?
Exactly. I mean, if the food can sit on a shelf for 2 years, it probably has nothing for you. It's already lost all of its value.
So perhaps we could say that definitively at this point, we don't necessarily know the specific, dangers of these foods yet, just because they're so new. But minimally, the nutrients, the nutrition of the food, so the protein in the salmon or the nutrients we would get from the corn, it would just seem that those nutrients would be compromised, and the health of the soil, over time, as these genetically modified crops are continuing to be planted, much of the nutrients that's in the food, comes from the soil. So it seems that the nutrients in the food would clearly be diminishing.
That's a really good question, because there's a new science called xenohormesis. It's an old science with toxicology where you see a different reaction based on dosage. So a small dose could be beneficial, a large dose kills you. But xenohormetic effect has been seen now as an explanation of how plants communicate to us. So the point is that if I genetically modify a plant so it's more resistant to pests and other things in the environment, and if I sterilize the soil and basically set up industrial farming, the plant no longer produces the chemicals that would have been beneficial to me.
Wow.
And suddenly I have a plant that has less value to me. The whole argument between organic and non-organic, a plant that's out there doing everything it can to keep up and survive in the environment actually has more value for us.
Right.
So it may be that as we modify these plants, we'll see a lot of the phytonutrients disappear, which are very important as we're studying them. We need them. You might even need only a couple molecules. And that's the idea, that a very small amount of something can cause a beneficial effect. But if the plant's made differently, we're finding that it doesn't grow those same beneficial chemicals. So it's not even just vitamins and minerals, it's all of the value that plants would have had for us in the past.
Wow. And with these, really significant increases in chronic diseases and obesity and heart disease,
that's being tracked.
Yeah, you can't help but, kind of, I guess, put two and two together, so to speak, that if the nutrition in the food is significantly declining, and of course people are eating tons of junk food and processed foods.
But even if they try to eat good food, they may not be getting the right signals. Yes.
Right. So the recommendations would be to eat organic, I guess, as much as possible.
Absolutely. There's controversy about that. I don't like the way some of the studies were done. They were trying to disprove that there's no difference. But we know for a fact that something that's naturally grown is different. It has different chemicals in it. It has a different composition. And we tend to do better with that.
So you personally, do you consume GMO foods or do you try to avoid them?
I do my best to avoid them. And the most effective thing that I can do is to shop at farmers markets. Sometimes I even try to go out directly to the farm. It's a nice field trip and go out and see exactly how the food was grown. Then I can be assured. I can see what was done. I can talk to the person who planted things. Right. So that's probably number one. If you can't do that, if you have to depend on the grocer, then talk to the produce person and find out where it was purchased. Sometimes you can see things on the labels and things like that, but basically there's a produce person there that can help you and point you in the direction of things that are organic, should be non-genetically modified, and then they'll probably have a little idea what was. We know that most corn and corn products is genetically modified. We know that a lot of soy is, probably all of it. Sorghum, we know that if canola oil is not cold pressed and naturally processed, it's going to be a genetically modified product. So you want to watch for that. They're not going to be required to label it. Some people advertise that they are non-GMO, right? So that helps if you're going to those people. But do as much as you can to find that you're eating original food and it's not industrially grown, where you have to start asking the questions. Right.
So pretty much, if somebody is consuming, kind of the mainstream, processed foods that contain, so we said corn, soy. Of course, sugar beets are also, so Correct. Anything with sugar.
The big industrial crops, we have to start putting those in question.
Right. Yeah. And, for something like corn, I mean, that's a really insidious one because
it's in everything.
High fructose corn syrup, cornstarch, all of these different things. If you actually turn over the label of your food and look for the word corn, you might see it on there.
Under a different name.
In so many different ingredients. And pretty much all that corn is going to be GMO.
Well, I probably should, I don't know, the corn producers are going to hate this, but I personally avoid corn. Not only because it's genetically modified, probably, but there's a lot of question as to whether corn is even in the same group as the other plants. There's actually researchers, I have to look up his name again, but he, through analyzing corn, found it has a different carbon structure and just seems to be different. So he's proposing that it came from, I don't know, if aliens or somewhere else, but it doesn't seem to fit in the plant kingdom with everything else. It's just different.
Interesting.
And it's funny. I kind of look at what an animal would naturally do. And I've had several people tell me that the cows won't eat corn unless it's their only choice. You starve them, they'll start eating it. Right. But a cow doesn't go out in the field and start eating corn cobs. It looks for the grass between the stalks.
Right.
So I kind of follow what the cow wants to eat.
I like that. That's a good rule of thumb.
But,
right.
But the cow's natural food, I don't think includes corn.
Right.
So I'm not sure it should be ours.
Corn is such, has been, cultured so much over the years and changed in so many ways.
Absolutely. And it's not something that you find organically or naturally grown that much anymore. And the question is if we can even find it, the original stuff that, say, the Indians brought. Or the aliens, I don't know.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
And thank you for being here. If you want to see our video where we discuss the most commonly genetically modified foods, we'll be including that link after the video and in the description. Please be sure to leave your comment letting us know what you think. Are GMOs safe or unsafe? Will you eat them or not? Be sure to subscribe to Psyche Truth so you can see all of our future videos, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.